This podcast is part of OctOSR, the October-long celebration of old school games, old school rule sets, and old school styles of play. For OctOSR this year, I'm going to be going over Muster, a Primer of War, advice for playing D&D in the wargaming way, published by Arkenstone Publishing, written by Eero Tuovinen. It can be found on the Arkenstone Publishing page on DriveThruRPG. The PDF is pay what you want, and I will include a link in the show notes. In this first episode, I just want to go over a brief overview of the book Muster. It's about 260 pages long. I'm working from the paperback version. This is the version I believe you can buy it. It's the version you'll get if you buy it at DriveThruRPG, the paperback version. I got it as part of the Indiegogo campaign that Eero used to launch this book. It's got a nice color cover that wraps around from front to back, and it features some men-at-arms in combat with various types of weapons, mostly polearms. No surprise, a game that's talking about D&D as wargaming. From the back cover, the ancient game of Dungeons & Dragons is played for victory. We play to improve and learn. There is no fairness of sport, no soporific of power fantasy, merely the earnest exploration of the possible and the fantastic. Muster is a friendly introduction to the particular ethos and technique of playing D&D as a wargame, a Kriegspiel. It's for both players and referees interested in learning about this distinct approach to the game. For best results, study Muster alongside the old school D&D rules text of your choice. As I go, I will be reading from the text of the book, sometimes fairly extensively. The text of the book has been released under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License. And it's a book that Eero has said he intends for people to be able to read for free and to exchange and to pass around so that people can enjoy this particular idea of playing D&D in a wargaming way. So I'm going to read over the first part of this book right now, Playing Dungeons & Dragons in the Wargaming Way, a Manifesto. So you've been asked to play Dungeons & Dragons, the seminal role-playing game. But there are numberless variants and playstyles out there. What is it even that you do in this game? Here's how to play in the wargaming way. Challenge proposed. A small commando team enters a magical underworld. Crack the dream logic. Observe the environment and apply your knowledge to predict the fairy chess rules of the dungeon reality. Map the labyrinth. Scout carefully and learn where monsters and treasures are. Choose which doors to open and which risks to take. To go on or to turn back. As resources dwindle and information increases, you are called to judge expedition goals against the risk of losses, choosing maneuvers to advance or retreat. And in some box text, he goes over a heritage of Kriegspiel. D&D is a role-playing game that is also a war game. Its philosophical basis is in conflict simulation gaming of the wargaming tradition. The principles we insist upon here are only novel compared to other types of role-playing games. Wargaming originates in the 19th century as a hobby and training tool of military men. Its creative ideals are about learning and sportsmanship. We play to understand conflict dynamics, learn culture and science, and grow in the contest. Although this may often be ignored today, D&D remains one of the high achievements of wargaming. Its subject matter is virtually unique in the field, focusing on myth and legend, conflict with fantastic unknowns, and teamwork on the skirmish scale. He then goes on to talk about what he considers the three cornerstones. A neutral referee, where the referee is responsible for preparing a challenging scenario, teaching the rules, adjudicating events. It says the referee does not have a plan for the outcome of the game. They're not responsible for the outcome, and therefore there is room for players to have agency. The referee is not an authoritarian master. They are a functionary of the game, not your social superior you are learning to dance together. The second cornerstone is real achievement. It's a game of skill and daring. It's not a theatrical show. You're not play acting inside the game master's planned story. Naturally, this means losses are real. exhilarating to avoid, depressing to face. Real achievement, real learning, real sportsmanship are only possible when the game is real. And simulation rules. The game is a conflict simulation. Its purpose is to shed light on how things work. It's not a board game conveniently self-enclosed and fair. Players maneuver against the imagined scenario and how it should work. The referee exists to apply and adapt rules to the reflected scenario. So a lot of principles that are also talked about within more traditional OSR styles of play are all there, where it's about how you play and not necessarily what the characters are created for, what they are capable of strictly on paper, strictly about numbers, and that there's not a pre-planned beginning, middle, and end. There's just a setting that the scenario that the referee, the game master, has put together and that the players explore. And then he adds some core principles for players. Ask questions. Ask questions about the rules. Ask questions about the situation. Ask questions of the other players. You should conspire together to overcome the scenario. Do not assume that there is a right or supposed thing for you to do. Retreat is always an option. Play the scenario rather than the rules, and I think this goes into the concept of metagaming that is kind of a divisive topic sometimes when you talk about role-playing games in general. And so this assumes that within the rules, there's not a metagaming currency, there's not a metagaming procedure within the rules themselves. So it's encouraging you to play the scenario as the characters would play them with what the characters would know. That's the way I read it. All the commentary is my opinion. Maneuver boldly is the last core principle he has for players. And take the consequences, he adds after that. And then he lists the basic campaign structure, quick charge in, or carge in, as we've had that discussion on my podcast before, character generation. No backstories. We'll get to know them in time if they survive. Start at first level. Character death is a necessity. It keeps the game honest. Use character stables to even out risk and choose suitable characters for different adventures. XP is goal-based, only granted for success. Treasure, not fighting. So this falls in line with the gold for XP discussion that's also had a lot in the OSR. XP is consistent and based on achievement only. No pity points, no attendance or good role-playing awards. There is no balance. Players call for retreat if they so judge, not the ref's responsibility. No cheating. The referee does not have a vested interest in the outcomes. There is never a reason to fudge. Rules are operated in the open and on trust. So again, we're talking on another subject that is deep in RPG culture. Fudging, usually we talk about fudging die rolls, but fudging rules can also be included in this. And then finally, within the manifesto, he offers some practical advice. Pack torches and water. Don't let the expedition fail for lack of basic necessities. Hire a big party. A good dungeoneering party is like 15 heads strong and capable of defending itself. Draw maps. It helps in visualizing the imaginary spaces explored in the game, and the reference material is invaluable over the long term. Explore and parlay. The game is only a string of combat encounters if you make it that. Focus on the situation, not your character. Challenges are overcome by making the right moves, not your character build. So, there again, rolling back to that older style of play where it's not about how you build your character, it's about how you use what you have. And then the book goes into, has a little box text about suitable rules texts. Modern D&D is difficult to play in the wargaming way because the culture of the game fights you every inch of the way. The ideas about game balance, chair-up, and creative purpose of the game are different. Old school D&D rules from the 1970s and 1980s are generally well suited, but they're also often confusing and crude and may be difficult to use for new players. The royal road to a first campaign is to pick a more recent old school style text, such as Labyrinth Lord, Osric, OSE, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or Swords and Wizardry. There are a lot of these. Veterans of the form tend to end up writing their own. Just choose one you like the look of to begin with. He also discusses why a manifesto. Not everybody knows about the wargaming playstyle. Presently, the mainstream of tabletop role-playing pursues different virtues. Hopefully, laying out the bones in this way might spark some ideas. After this manifesto, the book is divided into an introduction, a section called Basic Outline, another section called Advanced Matters, and then some appendices. The introduction is a brief overview of his approach to why he wrote this book and his experience and how his experience is built going into this book, about how he started with more modern forms of D&D and then seeking something different, something else. He came upon Keep of the Borderlands, and that led him to delve into investigating into the older texts and older styles of play and the old school Renaissance, the OSR, which is part of why I wanted to include it as part of OctOSR. And then he goes into the section that he refers to as the basic outline. But I'm going to skip ahead for this part of last part of this particular podcast to a little deeper in the book, a section called Campaign Setup. I encourage practitioners to treat the campaign as the basic unit of game development for D&D. The commercial history of the game has distorted this reality, encouraging us to think in terms of which game brand it is you're working with. We are playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons should be a trivial gesture towards the kind of rules tech you use, not the foundation of the practice. The true foundation is that we are playing D&D, a war game concerned with adventurous small commando fantasy warfare stuff and other adventure fiction matters from pirates to spaceships. The game has certain fundamental technical conceits ranging from a combined referee GM to party-based play to the use of hit points, but that's all it is. Elevating the petty technicalities of addition over this foundation is missing the forest for the trees. And what may be worse, caring so very much about the game text blinds you to the house you should be building, your own campaign. For gamers used to thinking in RPG culture ways, I would encourage you to think of your own campaign as the game. Specifically, your campaign is the platform onto which matters like the game setting and the game rules hang on to. You don't choose to play AD&D and then choose to play Forgotten Realms and then start a campaign. It's actually the other way around. You first decide to start a D&D campaign titillated by various creative ideas, and you prepare to fulfill those ideas by pulling together rules, setting lore, players, and other things. Give the campaign a name. I found that this helps in treating it as the creative project it is. And for me, this really harkens back to the roots of the game, to the old school of the old school. Dave Arneson's campaign was Blackmore. Gary Gygax's campaign was Greyhawk. That was what they called their games. That all the rules, all the setting lore, all the characters that were developed, some of which eventually got folded into the game of Dungeons and Dragons through the names of various spells. All these things were their games, and the rules developed from the adventure and the type of adventure they were trying to have, and not vice versa. So it's interesting to me that he mentions that, and that he has set that as the foundations of the game. The campaign is the game, not anything else. So that's just a brief start to what I hope to do with this book. I don't have a coherent plan, as you may have noticed from some of my podcasts. It's not exactly coherency here, but I found it really interesting reading, and there's a lot of things both familiar and different from my perspective in terms of what the old school styles of play and what's generally seen in OSR circles that a lot of times are in fact more concerned with what rule set and what rule set is it based on. Is it based on AD&D? Is it based on BX? Is it based on BECMI? Is it based on OD&D? So I think this is a little different approach. There's a lot of familiarity in here. There's going to be a lot of dovetailing with what we've seen as old school principles. But I think it's going to be, I hope it will be as exciting for you guys to hear about as it has been for me to read. So until next time, happy OctOSR.